So my name is Ryan Lindsay. I am an associate professor of practice and currently the assistant dean for social work here at the Brown School. I joined our faculty as a full-time faculty member in 2016. So this is finishing my 5th year as a full-time faculty, but then I also taught here as an adjunct for 5 years prior to that. So I've been with the Brown School about 10 years. My clinical and professional journeys started off as a clinical social worker. That training really is organized. My husband showed up and is dropping off a bunch of packages in here right next to me, so I apologize.
What did you get?
I'm on a thing right this moment. Thank you. Joys of working from home together. So I started off working in outpatient mental health services in a community mental health center and focusing on the intersection of suicide, self-injury, and trauma. And working in some family-based interventions. And so my entire career has really been how do we support youth, families, and adults who are experiencing suicidality, most of the time with the intersection of trauma, and kind of support the healing trajectories of many. And my career has expanded to organizational development. I founded an organization called Sparlin Mental Health. And then also I do some work, a lot of work around school-based suicide prevention policies and practices. And so, fundamentally in social work, where we are always operating and thinking about interventions at the micro, meso, and micro level, or the micro, meso, and macro levels, because we have to be thinking about policies, and if we're wanting to engage in the practices that can be most beneficial to our constituents. And so my clinical history, I identify as a clinical social worker. I identify as my heart is in the clinical work. I'm no longer doing individual clinical work, but I help organizations, and I do a lot of training and building competencies for future mental health professionals or existing mental health professionals. So that's a little bit about who I am and my history. I teach in the mental health concentration, so I chair the concentration. What that means is that I help set the vision and organize all the people around moving our curriculum forward so that we're staying up to date and then advancing and incorporating new knowledge as we move forward. And then I teach a course called Differential Diagnosis. I teach our theories course in mental health, which is brand new this year. I teach a course on PTSD treatment. I teach a course on motivational interviewing, which is about engagement strategies. I teach a course on a specific intervention for suicide. And so a course that addresses suicidality, and then another course called dialectical behavior therapy. So I teach a lot. And so I get to kind of meet a lot of students and be a mentor on students' journeys. So that's a little bit about me and what my role is at the school. I'm also an advisor. So when I think about our curriculum and what is our curriculum preparing you to do, I always want to level set with everybody in that every single curriculum in social work is helping to prepare you to enter the field. So no curriculum is designed to give you every competency you will need and knowledge base for the rest of your career, but it's giving you the information you need to enter the field and then explore and scaffold your own career trajectory. And so our curriculum includes a theory course. So for child behavioral health, that track is a course around work with children, youth, and families. So theoretical and empirical approaches to doing that. You have a differential class, so that means diagnostics, a part of our mental health system and access to care is centered around diagnostics, and the entrance into many of our programs and the work that people will be doing postmasters will be at that level. It also helps to prepare people for licensure. We have intervention courses and a family therapy course or a trauma course that are a part of that. And then in addition to that, there's a policy course that looks at how do I understand myself, the system and the services, and what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do as a clinical social worker. So our program is very clinically oriented. So it's designed to prepare you to enter the field and work with individuals and families and groups. So the curriculum is elevating and is primarily focused on that level of intervention, though you will get Matzo and macro practice skills throughout your time here. And people who graduate from our programs go on and work in community mental health systems. They work in nonprofits, child welfare systems, school-based systems as school-based mental health providers, program directors and program managers, and work in program development. So the career trajectories are pretty, profound, but typical of what, any social work program is going to prepare students to enter the field. So future professional social workers. So that's my little spiel. I would love to know more about you all and what questions you have.
Please feel free to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and share a little bit about what brought you to the session today.
Who wants to be courageous?
My name is Allison. I am coming in the fall as an MSW, and I am interested in pursuing a path towards being a marriage and family therapist, or doing relationship, group therapists in that way. So just interested in what it looks like to have dynamics between children and parents, or between parents that are married or unmarried, and when trauma comes in, all those different pieces and how they work together.
Yeah, the layer and effect of that is really important. I think one thing to recognize is that social work was the original family therapy and center of a lot of our work. Marriage and family therapy is actually a separate profession governed by marriage and family therapists. Much of our curriculum is similar, but it has a broader social work perspective that amplifies that. Our contemporary family therapies course will help prepare work with children. Social work practice with youth and families is going to prepare you to work within the context of a diverse meaning of what family means. A broad definition of that, an inclusive definition of that, and then understanding how historical and current and trauma influences relationships is an important element that is embedded across the curriculum. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my name is Tracy, and I'm coming in as a dual degree student, the MPH and the MSW. I think right now I'm still trying to, see what track I want to do, whether it's the children, youth, and families or the mental health one, because with where my interest lies, a little bit of everything, honestly. But I hope to work with African-American communities who've been impacted by substance abuse, but also the children as well, because they've gone through trauma, and a lot of times these cycles repeat with substance abuse. So I was just hoping to learn more about what you do and some of the classes that you teach to see if maybe this is the path I should be taking with the children, youth, and families, or maybe mental health, because I'm not really sure right now.
Yeah, and I think that one question you want to ask yourself is, at what level of intervention are you hoping to kind of target to address trajectories and pathways? So if you're thinking about how do we stop cycles or replication within families, we can't just target a family and do that. There's so many social factors that are creating constraints and keeping people in context that you can't just say, oh, if you just don't want to use substances, you don't have to do that. That is a much broader conversation to be talking about that. So some questions you want to ask yourself is, are you wanting to work on these supports and youth development, identity development, and kind of like the pathways to prevention of the onset or the use of substance use? Children, youth, and families would be a perfectly appropriate concentration, or mental health. And the reason being is actually this concentration is a blend of both of them. So 2 of the courses of the theory course, the policy course, as well as 1 practice methods course comes from children, youth, and families. So you're going to get a blend of children, youth, and families anyways. And then the other courses come from the mental health side. So it's a nice blending of both, since we have expertise in children, youth, and families. And when we're talking about this, there's a lot of flexibility. And there's a lot of overlap in content anyways. So we don't want to replicate. And so choosing child behavioral health gets you children, youth, and families, especially if one of the outcomes you're really interested in is behavioral health outcomes. So substance use, mental health, trauma, like when we're thinking about how to intervene, mental health will give you more specialized interventions to target at the individual, family, and group level. And where children, youth, and families they'll give you some more, a broader perspective of how also you can integrate larger, more group and community level intervention. And so if you think like youth empowerment is really where you want to be, children, youth, and families is where you might want to center your education. If you're thinking, I want that to be an element, but I'm really interested, how do we treat and help resolve existing mental health conditions in youth? So we're not working on the upstream piece, we're working on the effects of the fact that we don't have the upstream solution yet. And so we're at that space. We need people in that role because we haven't figured out, we haven't solved the upstream issues yet. So if you're wanting to look at that and where people are developing PTSD in response to experiences that they've had in their life, if people are experiencing depression, youth are experiencing depression or anxiety disorders, these kinds of that level, that's mental health. So that's kind of like when you kind of thinking about which one do I go, when you're thinking about the point of intervention is at the point where people have experienced the downward effect and the devastating effects of upstream problems. That's mental health. We are working as a concentration on moving and creating pathways from a prevention side, but you're going to get that prevention in your MPH program. So think about when you're public health is so much about prevention and promotion, then complement that skill set in your social work side and get that individual, family, and group piece, because you're going to get a lot of community and prevention strategies on that side of your programming. And for anyone else on this call, what is really exciting is that the public health program has now created a behavioral health specialty on their side, and you can take electives that can give you more public health orientation that focuses more on prevention and mental health promotion strategies. That falls more in the public health realm than social work, although we overlap, a lot. So you can also broaden your exposure to different kinds of ways we can intervene on these trajectories and pathways.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I haven't fully figured everything out yet, but I'm hoping that at least with the public health side, I'll be able to learn more about the prevention piece. Because like I said, I just feel like these cycles keep on repeating.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes when you get older, it's more about the harm reduction aspect, but I want to do stuff before that point.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that maybe with one of those concentrations, like the behavioral health one, it'll expose me to the different levels, not just like the micro level, but also like the meso and the macro level as well.
Yeah. No, that's those are not easy, and that's a part of all the work that we're doing. So yeah, great. What about other questions from anyone else?
Hi, I'm Adiola.
Hey.
Hi. And I know that eventually, well, I'm an incoming MSW student, and I know that I want to be a licensed clinical social worker. So I know that, once I get my master's, have to get that supervised experience. I think it's like 2 years, right? 2 or 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I guess my question is like, what kind of advice would you give to someone that wants to go like the clinical route when it comes to like what kind of experience I should be looking for? Because I know I want to work with children, adolescents, maybe college students, but I definitely want to work with families and everything, and the young folk basically.
Yeah.
So I was like wondering what kind of experience I should be looking for to go that clinical route.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about the let's talk practicum. So generally speaking, when I think about practicums, if you're coming in as a full-time student without a BSW, so some of you might be advanced standing, I'm not sure, but if you're coming in without a BSW, think about your foundation curricula, your foundation practicum. We have 2 different practicums, foundation and then concentration. In your foundation practicum, think about that as an opportunity to get yourself familiar with either people, places, or context. So maybe it's not exactly what you're wanting to do, but it's the people, places, or context you're wanting to do work with. You want to engage and work with. This is kind of like your foundation is your entrance into the field, but it also gives you an opportunity to kind of flex that. I think about then concentration practicum is I want to really hone in on my skill set. All right, which means I'm going to look for the opportunities that will give me, if I want to work at the individual level, I want to find opportunities that give me the opportunities to do individual work, even if it's with people, places, or contexts that I'm not wanting to go with. So I'm thinking about how do I get the skill piece? So the more we narrow our search criteria, the fewer options there are, and the more competition may be for that one specific experience. So I think about it as what skills do you need to be competitive for your first job? Like everything is about entering the field and what you want to be prepared and really good at doing after your first 3 years. Who knows what's going to happen after 3 years? So I entered this, there's no part of me that thought that I would be in the position that I am today, doing education, working with organizations, and doing research and policy, please. Like, no way, I was never that. I'm a clinical social worker. And now I'm out there like doing policy work. So, our careers go in different directions, and we discover ourselves, and we achieve an impact, but then that impact no longer satisfies the contribution we want to create in the world, or a new problem or issue that is existing, where my entire career has always been, okay, I want to be able to do this, but we don't have a system that supports me being able to do this. This creates the inequities. This inequity is not fair. We need to figure out a way that we solve this, so that, because we do have technology or opportunities for folks, but not everybody can access them. That's wrong. How do we solve that problem? And we solve that problem at the policy level. So it's not, I can't demand my organization to allow myself to do something that won't be paid on. So, we can disagree with that, but we need to be at that policy level. Okay. So kind of going back to this, you want to think about your practicum as preparing you to enter your field, so you don't get too far down. We have so many options here at the Brown School. It's really easy to I want to take everything. My biggest advice for all of you is don't take everything. bandwidth is limited, and the science on learning is that we only have so much bandwidth to incorporate. And what you want to think about by the end of your is not that, did I take a class, but did I take a class, consolidate the knowledge, and now I can reenact that knowledge when I'm interviewing for my first job. Like really narrow it to that, because you can say you took a class, but then when I'm interviewing you and you're like, I can't find any of that knowledge because it's not coming up. We've all been there where you're like, I took that class, I don't remember it. I watched that movie, I don't know what it's about. That book I know I read, but I don't know anything, I don't remember reading it. You don't want your MSW experience like, I took the class, but I know nothing from it. So really hone. This is about giving you the opportunity to like really incorporate. And if you don't have any time to reflect, to kind of like, if you don't have that time, it's just knowledge insertion and then knowledge, gone. So don't overcommit, even though it'll feel like you need to. The other thing about that is there's lots of opportunities for professional development afterwards. We've got all these, different treatment courses that you're like, oh, I want to make sure I take that. I want to make sure I take that. And they're amazing because they're here. And if you're not doing the work, if you can't implement this tomorrow when you leave, then it's not going to stick as much. You might have a general understanding, which is okay, but you might just then better be prepared to read the protocol manual, after, when you're later and learn about it later, because if you can't put it into action, it just doesn't ground well. So I say that because everybody will be like, oh, I want to do a specialization. I want to do this. I want to do that. Your journey is your journey. My advice to you is to not overcommit your journey, because what you ultimately are wanting to do is to be an amazing clinical social worker or a social worker. And so that requires your kind of a level of restraint in the candy shop, where you're like, all right, fine. One handful. We don't want to approach our MSW program like eating popcorn in a theater, which is handfuls. And then you're like, how did I eat all that? And how do I actually fit that many kernels of popcorn in my mouth at once without choking? That's what we don't want our MSW experience like that. And we have some really amazing, youth-oriented practicums from the Child Advocacy Center that is really going to, hone in on trauma and youth and families, and our best strategies that we have to date. We have art-oriented through artworks. We've got school-based mental health, context. We have community mental health center placements. We've got hospitals. There's a full range of options for people. And the most important thing anyways is that when you enter this field, anybody that's hiring, although the intervention part is why we're coming to school, you learn so much of the intervention in practice after school. So you want to really figure out, I need lots of opportunities engaging, so working with diverse families and people, and assessing. That's really what you want to get really good at, because assessment matters so much for what comes afterwards. And that's what employers are really looking for. We can train interventions easier. Most employers are resource strapped to begin with. We're in social work. So what they don't want to have to do is start from the beginning and get you comfortable meeting with humans. So focus on get comfortable with humans, and then assessing what's going on, and then intervention comes next.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. What about others on here? Questions or any ways that I can be helpful?
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Amalia, and I'll be coming in as an MSW MPH as well.
Hey.
Woohoo! And really, I am interested in becoming a clinical social worker. I know that I want to work as a therapist, but I am one of the popcorn eating people, or shoveling people, I guess. Just because every session I go to, I'm like, I'm really excited by this. I'm really excited by this. So narrowing down, I think, is going to be tricky, but I am encouraged that like the first year is just kind of foundation, and hopefully we can, that's set, so I can come in and hopefully figure out and narrow down from there.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you saying that you don't have to fit everything into the 2 or 3 years as is my case. So, but I am curious about licensure. So can you tell me a little bit about the courses that, like, if that's the route we want to go, what kind of courses are required for that, or, you know, for different, I know there's different sort of some states have reciprocity, some don't. So just curious about that, and sort of continuing education as well, if we can't fit everything into the 3 years.
So I'm going to say this in pennant and I'll come back later, but we have over 300 some odd professional development workshops offered every single year. And as students, the vast majority of them cost you $10. This is the most underutilized resource, because that entire professional development workshop menu allows you to be able to get kernels of these pieces that our classes cover, that then is not, you know, you're not taxing yourself with the class and the assignments that we have to, you know, engage in to grade you as part of the educational piece. So I'm gonna just kind of put that on your radar, focus on that. So many ways in which you can learn, and it's really accessible for students. Going to licensing. So the first thing to understand about licensing is that a license to practice social work is governed by states. Okay, so the states own the regulatory, authority. So that means every state has a slightly different process and requirement. Okay. Once you obtain a license in any state, generally speaking, and I will say generally, there are some exceptions because, you know, we got to have exceptions, but generally speaking, states honor that. They basically, if you're going to go through licensing in my state, you've got to follow my process. But once you've achieved that, there is, don't get me wrong, a ton of bureaucratic things you have to, like, form situation that you have to submit for that reciprocity. But generally speaking, it's honored. And if you have to do anything, it's usually a state-specific jurisprudence exam or a state-specific requirement around suicide prevention, or there might be some small pieces that you can get through a professional development workshop. Right? Generally speaking, there are some exceptions to that. And so what I always recommend people do, if you have a state that you're either going to return to, or where you believe, or a set of states that you're wanting to go to afterwards, go to their professional registration websites. So the state professional registration websites, and you can explore their requirements. Alternatively, on the my website that I put in there, there is a state disclosures tab on that website that actually tells you specifically, you know, what is needed for each of you to be eligible for licensing in a particular state. Our program, if you take mental health, anything in mental health, you are fine in like 90% of the states. The only states that we don't meet certain requirement is because it's because those states require a state-specific either exam or a state-specific jurisprudence, or or workshops, like California has state laws around child welfare and some specifics around that stuff. So you can check out on the website in terms of like if there's ways that you want to kind of think about, you know, classwork going forward. But if your mental health, you're in pretty good shape. And what I will say is that, you know, most states, they are either super lax. Missouri doesn't have specificity around its regulations. So you could be domestic, social, and economic development and graduate and never take a single clinical class ever. And the state requirement is graduation from an accredited social work program. That's it, with an MSW. Now, where it gets regulated is that to get supervision, you have to land a job. So if you don't have clinical training or education, you're probably not going to get hired unless you know somebody. So there's a, you know, the market drives, you know, we're a very conservative GOP run state. So the market drives that regulation. So which generally lands. Like no one's going to hire somebody who has had no training or information around behavioral health versus somebody who does, all things being equal. So the other piece is the most important class that I see, or a curriculum that is mandated by states, is called the standard is Psychopathology, which is our differential diagnosis course. I have to have us sign off guaranteeing that you had a quote clinical course of study, or that courses meet certain criteria. As the assistant dean of the program, I review those frequently for our registrar. It's bureaucratic loophole, like, you know, you got to jump through them, but it's generally, you're pretty good. If you're going to create a different pathway, you have to be thinking about that though. For licensing afterwards, most states have a generalist exam that is national, and then they have a clinical social work exam, which is also national. So usually there's 2 exams you have to pass after your graduation. And the timing of it just depends on your state. And the other piece around that is wherever you land post-graduation, stick there until you're licensed, because where things differ across states are at that licensing, like when you're in the process of becoming licensed. So states have different requirements related to who can be your supervisor. And so in one state, it might meet that criteria, in another state, it may not. So then you lose all those hours. In certain states, employment counts as your hours. In other states like Kansas, you have to document every face-to-face interaction until you've achieved 1,500 hours of sitting in front of somebody. And you have to have a log that documents that. So it is important that you do explore. It's a question. If you do think that you're going to end up in a state that requires one of those logs, I would really be looking at that, because you would want to, there's no way to go back and recreate that. So if it is something that you're like, I don't know, Kansas might be on it. I don't know. And off the top of my head, I don't know which other ones. If they require a log in any of those states, but you're planning to be licensed in another state, I would actually recommend you keeping a log just in case. Because these things are subject to change. So what is true today may not be true tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I actually don't have that much questions at this moment, since I think you clarified basically everything. I just wanted to share that I'm also coming in as an MSW student, and I'm really interested in child behavioral health.
Mm-hmm.
I love children. I love to work with children in general. and I'm also thinking of becoming a clinical social worker. Yeah, that's all about me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Most of my work is centered around youth, older youth and families, and young adults and adults. I did some work with smaller children, and I don't understand children, so that didn't work out for me. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this. As I've aged, I've come to appreciate the child lens more.
Did you know that you wanted to work with youth when you started out?
No, I started my MSW program only focused on working with adults. And when I finished, which my position that year was unique, and it was half in the adult psychiatry and half in child and adolescent psychiatry. And so through that process, I began to become more exposed to working with children and youth and families. And youth and adolescents, like I fell in love working with, that was completely unexpected. I didn't think that was something. I think the programming and the kinds of work that I was doing also like made it somewhat different. So I think, I was very young. I went straight for my undergrad. I graduated in 3.5 years, went straight right into my MSW program. And I was always on a fast track. So I was, I wasn't actually that much older than many of my clients. Like I was 23 years old, doing a lot of this work, like when I graduated. So, if I would have gone backwards, I would have done it a little bit differently, but that's just what it was. And so I always felt like I was either too close or too young, or like they wouldn't know that I'm an adult. So that's how I looked at it. But I really did it, and I've always loved the mixture of working with adolescents, families, and then adults. I love working with adults too. There's just a different set of factors. Now that I'm out of direct clinical practice, and I'm on an extended sabbatical. I will return. I don't know that I will return to doing adolescent and family work, partially because of the other demands I have in my life, in terms of my work. But I do think that because there's just different things that we're navigating. And also I'm a little bit older than I used to be. And so my brain doesn't work quite as much. So sometimes I'm even though I'm trained to understand, I don't understand because I've lost my memory of when I was an adolescent. So as I've aged myself and matured in different ways, my capacity to understand, but not necessarily connect. So that remains to all be seen. But it's like these are things that we learn throughout our careers, where we might come in thinking like this is the point of intervention we want to work with. And I think we all have to kind of have a strong understanding of what's driving us to come to this work. Many of us are coming to this work because we've been touched in one way or form, either through our own personal experience, family, loved ones, peers, community. We've been impacted in some way, shape, or form. And we can't always know how this work will impact us. And that's a part of, learning where we fit in the broad array of social work intervention. And that we might come in thinking we want to work at the individual and family and group level. And we might recognize that takes a large emotional toll on us. And I think there's strong legitimacy around saying, I can do work at a level that doesn't make me feel pain every day. Like to think that somehow we have to overcome that, our histories live on with us, and that's important to recognize our relationship to that, because one strategy is to figure out a way to treat your responses to that, or another strategy is stop putting yourself in those situations to feel that way. And you can create, opportunities at a different level of intervention that's impactful and is social work and is helping to support families and youth and children, go to be what they're destined to be. That's, like why I think all of us come here and to social work, and we're trying to think about, okay, how do I help with that destiny, that achievement, that imagination, like actual moving from imagining it to doing it and being able to achieve it. So yeah. And a lot of that is just trying on a lot of hats. So that's totally okay. If you don't know exactly what you want to do, that's fine too. The great thing about social work is that at baseline, it is a generalist practice degree. So it's preparing you to work at every level. Now, obviously your concentration will narrow it into more specificity, but you're still prepared to work at all levels of social work. And then you can focus your professional development around that. So if you don't know what you want to do, that's totally fine too. If you have a really specific way and not like dream or pathway, that's great too. I was lucky that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, after I explored a bunch of other things in undergrad. I was like, oh, I have this class in business that started a month ago that I never showed up to. I should probably drop that. And that shouldn't be my major right now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. I've been really encouraged by all the very winding pathways that all the faculty have taken, because I've been out of school for 8 years. I have a background in the arts, and I don't have a background in research or really, solidly social work, right? Not in a professional way or even in education. So I don't know exactly the population I want to work with yet. And so that, coming in to people like, oh, you need to know who you want to work with. I was like, I don't know yet. So it's nice to know that there's time.
Yeah. You have your whole career. That's the great thing. You can switch even mid-career. It evolves, based on, I do a lot of work, so much of my work is actually around clinical competency development for existing professionals, specifically suicide risk assessment and safety planning. Unfortunately, people fear this a lot and default to emergency rooms to do that assessment, which doesn't make them any more qualified than the person who referred them there. We want to reduce the number of hospitalizations that are unnecessary. There's a role for that intervention in the continuum of care, but we shouldn't be defaulting to that. But I also equally care deeply about, the impact on providers that are non-mental health. So right now I'm working on a project with our local hospital system that has experienced a dramatic uptick in child behavioral health crises and admittance into the hospitals. So much so that the child behavioral health or pediatric behavioral health unit is overcrowded, and they're placing behavioral health clients or patients and children and youth on other floors that are not prepared to hold these folks, but there's no place for these kiddos to go. Our system has failed. And so there's a whole host of things that are happening. But most importantly, I just got off this was a phone call that's led to me being in a hoodie still. And I was gonna put on a real shirt for y'all. They care deeply about their work, but as nurses and just, they chose post-surgical support, not behavioral health. It's just not in their current repertoire. And so they're not able to show up as the nurses they believe themselves they are capable of being. And that deeply hurts them. They're each having their own sense of intense stress responses and mental health consequences to not being able to know that you're doing your job well, where you used to feel really competent in doing your job well. And so, I'm working with them to kind of think about what kind of structures of support can we put in place? What kinds of training that we can provide the various levels of providers within the hospital systems that are supporting these children who are in crisis and are in deep, deep pain themselves. And then what kinds of systems and structures do you have to change, or policies do you need to change to help create a pretty compassionate space? And a perfect example of this is they have an attendance policy. So when you're at work, you have to there are ways in which you have to ask off, and there's some problems when you don't ask off in the ways that you need to, or if you're asking off too much. And leaders are judged, they're evaluated, and they're able to keep their jobs based on implementing policies that is a much way above their pay grade. And so they have this tension because there'll be something traumatic that happens on the unit, and they may even experience a trauma on a unit, and then they're still expected to return to work. And so we've got to create a system and policy shift here, because if we're going to think about equity here, we have to start approaching, if this same nurse or this same support worker person had tripped and sprained their ankle or broken their foot, they would be okay to be off. So why are we viewing emotional trauma as something different than this physical thing that's occurred? Given that these units are holding the failure of our system, that's not their fault, nor are they trained to do this, and it makes a lot of sense to me why they're terrified. And so I'm working with them to kind of think about how you both structurally support your staff, but also how do we increase the competencies and put in strategies and activities to help buffer something that might be chronic. Because and then I'm working way behind the scenes with our Department of Mental Health at the state level to say, how are you going to meet these needs? Because these youth are not getting what they need. And you are directly responsible for kind of figuring out how to do that. And so at every level of intervention has to be kind of woven together. If I just came in and said, all right, how do we buffer you against this unreasonable stress that's being placed upon you? I think they just tell me to leave. Because it isn't fair. So, and that was never anything that I ever wanted to do. That was never in my conceptualization. But it's work I love doing, helping people feel good about what they're doing.
Yeah, and I bet your background in clinical social work, like that individual work, really set you up.
Correct.
With a different view. Yeah.
Yeah. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have the engagement strategies, the assessment strategies, but also the intimate knowledge of being able to kind of understand the dialectical tension here is that, that youth are in extreme pain, and they are also engaging in behaviors that are harming people. So we can't just come in and say, they're just in pain, you need to be okay with that. Well, that pain is causing harm. We have to be able to live in this really gray complexity that these two things are true. And so if we're going to help create a support environment, we have to understand the two are true, and we have to privilege both people's safety, the staff and that poor youth. You can't just privilege one over the other. And it's really easy to do that. Any last questions before we wrap up? Well, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. I get lots and lots of email. So if you email me and I don't respond in 2 days, just repin it at the top of my email and keep doing that till I respond. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions, but have, when you come, I hope to get to see everybody. Some of us in person. I'm teaching both in person and remotely. And eventually we will be back to some normal of some, I don't know what that will be. I don't know what normal actually will ever be going forward, but feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do advising, consult, whenever you need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you all for popping in today to chat with us. This was really fun to just talk back and forth. I really appreciate all of you. Hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.